The hour. This meeting is being recorded. Got it. Um, so welcome to our Saturday morning gathering of people that like to share their opinions. Some of them sharing the same opinions over and over again. And this morning, or this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are, we have some new opinions to hear. Our presenter today has been calling for 51 years. I think he probably takes breaks for breakfast, lunch, and supper. And he's actually been a full-time caller for 41 years, which means that, well, maybe he can tell us what a full-time call, but basically meaning you can actually make an income and live by this and not just have it as a hobby. He happens to be a member of Caller Lab. Oh, and did I mention that he's been on the board of governors of Caller Lab for 30 years?
Say no.
And within the board of governors, he's been on the executive committee, and within the executive committee, and as all of Caller Lab knows, he was chairman of the board for 2 terms. This gentleman calls square dancing for parties and mainstream and plus, all the way up through C2 on a regular basis, and dabbles in C3A from the state of Virginia and the country of U.S. That's right, I usually change my thing. Let's all welcome John Marshall.
Thank you, folks. Thanks, Don. When I started calling in 1968, well, I started dancing in 68. Being 20 years old, nobody could tell me anything, so I started calling in 69. I fully believe, had I danced longer, I would have been a better caller sooner. But I was 20. What could you say? I knew what I wanted to do, and I went after that with a passion, and it has been my passion. As far as making a living, as many of the old timers know, back in that era, in the 70s and into the 80s, so on, our numbers were such that you could make a living. You could actually make money, which is even more than making a living. We all know that didn't hold out forever, and we've spiraled down for all types of reasons that would take us 6 or 7 weeks to explore, all of us in this room, and we still wouldn't have the solution for that. But at that time you could. Anymore, I wouldn't recommend anybody who's thinking of that, unless you have one heck of a retirement plan already in place. I would not recommend this as a career move. But it is good for people if you're newer into it, having some idea what you want to do with your calling. Betsy Gata is one of my favorite teachers, and Betsy, as she tells people in her caller schools, as I've done with her, what are you doing going around the room? Why are you here? Why are you here? And when they get to her, she says, I'm here because I'm training my replacements. And we need replacements. We really do. We have an aging calling population everywhere, for the most part, although I do know that the northernmost and youngest square dance club on the planet happens to be a teen club in Siberia. And we had them at IPAC. They came down by bus 28 hours one way. And we put them up. We didn't charge them. They had a young caller, 17 years old. He was in his glory. All these, young teen ladies were in the club. They had a lady president. They're very proud of who they are, where they're located. And and he was, of course, in his glory. He was 17, surrounded by young girls, admiring this young caller getting his start. And he was quite good. I haven't been in touch for a while. I hope they're still going well, but I wish we didn't have to look quite that far to find younger dancers. And there's all kinds of reasons for it, but that's not part of our topics today. I don't want to get off track right off the bat. My thanks to all of you who are taking any of your own personal time to be here. Even though a lot of us feel we have extra time with the lockdown business and the COVID, it's your time that you're willing to spend with me, and I hope I make it worth your while. I enjoy calling, obviously, a great deal. I love teaching, maybe even more than eating, and my goodness, look at me. But I still, I love to teach dancers and callers. We have a number of topics, but I did want to tell you that if I say anything today that offends anybody or you take exception to, that's okay. You'll have a chance to challenge it, and we can discuss it. Maybe I will not offend anybody by intent, and maybe I have an opportunity to express myself better if I've offended you. That's not my intention. One of our icons in this country, not in square dancing, but historically was Benjamin Franklin. And I take a page from his book. He always said that if you preface whatever you say with, in my opinion, you're never wrong. So in my opinion, this is what we're going to talk about today. Obviously, nobody's 100% right all the time, but the idea here is to try to address the group. I know we have some newer callers. We have some folks that are well experienced, and there's old timers like myself. And a few of you in this room are beyond. You know, as I said, I started calling in '69. How many in here are been calling that long? Any of our group? There you go. Look at the hands pop, boom, boom, boom. And that's great because you guys, I do feel sorry for you because like me, you have a virus. You know, calling's a virus. You know, if you love it, it's in your blood. It is not going to go away. It's very hard to walk away from. Callers have tried. I tried once, and it didn't work out. I'm back. And bad penny. You can't get rid of me. One of the topics we were talking about was site calling, and I know especially experienced callers say, "Oh, we have to listen about site calling again." Some of this will be for the newer callers, and some of it will be for you experienced callers, and maybe I'll have an idea or two that you might find valuable. Let me say first that site calling is not the do-all, be-all of calling. It's one of a group of methods of choreo management. Most callers use a combination. In my opinion, site calling is not how you start. You cannot use the dancers like human checkers. You can't do it. And as a newer caller, if you're standing there and you've run out of things to say, and it's a matter of 4 or 5 seconds, maybe a little longer, that you're stuck and the dancer's trying to look at you, that suddenly magnifies time, an incredible amount of time. You suddenly feel like, oh, they've been waiting for me for the last 5 minutes and I don't know what to say. That's not how we treat dancers. They're there to be entertained, and they're there to dance. And while you're trying to figure out what can I call next, that's not site calling. You know, it's a factor of one way of managing. Let me say up front that callers who claim to be exclusively and purely extemporaneous site callers are not thinking it through when they say something like that, because even unknowingly, there are times when site callers will use modules, even if they're not fully conscious of it being a module. But there are calls that we know fit well together, whether it doesn't matter what the program is you're calling, mainstream plus doesn't matter. There are calls that fit well together. For me, square dancing is, in fact, a language. And when we go to Japan, we call it the same language. The dancers have to learn the language of square dance. You can walk up to somebody on the street who's not a dancer and say, spin chain and exchange your gears. And, excuse me, are you crazy person? It means nothing. So where do we transition when we're learning a language between having to translate that language into something meaningful, or when do we think in that language? And the longer you are in the activity and actively calling, and even if you're using memorized systems or if you're using written material, and the other guys will tell you, and ladies, in the early days, it was unprofessional to quote read. You didn't do it. And truly reading, we shouldn't be doing that either. We learn how to scan material when we present it, so we're aware of what's happening on the floor. But it's an unfortunate term saying, you know, well, he's a reader. I don't care which method or combination of methods you use. If you do it well, the dancers enjoy it, and you're aware of what's happening on the floor, then in my view, I think it's perfectly fine. But again, you need to be tied into the dancer. The reason I prefer to do mostly sight is because I am linked to the floor. I do see where there's a problem spot. I do see how people are moving. I do know if I need to take an extra beat for a square over here that I don't want to lose out of the corner. If I can keep them going. But overall, as much continuous motion as possible. We say things like wind in your face. You want people to come up to you and say, boy, you really made us feel like dancers that time. Stop and go dancing is not dancing. I'm sorry. And I don't care what the program is. If I'm calling it the C2 program, I want it to dance. I want the people to dance to the music. Let's go back to the module thing for a moment. There are calls that fit together, and they may not want to call them a module, but they are. And it's not a module necessarily for resolution. We have a thing called sight before resolution. And there, again, as you know, there are a number of systems out there or combinations of systems. You find what works best for you. Most callers use a combination, and most callers will acknowledge that. And if you're a brand new caller and your real problem, as it was for me, the idea of choreography and resolution, I started as a singing caller. I was a singer, and that's before I ever got into square dancing, and that's what I wanted to do. This business choreography, that was smoke and mirrors. That was dark magic. I'm telling you, made no sense to me. And I went and took a class with a man named Mac Parker, who was a fellow who formalized for us and identified for us sequence and symmetry. And unfortunately, he didn't allow us to use checkers. We had to diagram every call. Diagram on paper with a pencil, where is square through 2? Where is square through 3? Where is right and left through? Where is hand? We had to do this call after call after call. Well, we've modernized in a lot of ways. And the idea of using little checkers or dolls is still very effective. And that has to do with a session we may get into more next Saturday on writing and how to write, why to write in certain ways and what you're trying to accomplish. But sticking on the sight topic, as a newer caller, if you've gotten to the point where you can, for all intent and purposes, take the dancers on a ride, don't worry about the resolution. I see a lot of newer callers, the first thing they're worrying about is resolving. That's not a good way to spend your time and your effort. The dancers are not going to enjoy that kind of calling. At some point, when you know what calls fit together and you know that you can call this call after that call and it's good body flow, which is so critical, and you've got your dancers touching hands and supporting and you earn their trust, they'll give you whatever you want. And so the more of that you can do, fine. Well, then we hit this wall of I got to resolve. Where are they? I'm not a proponent of having to know where the dancers are at all times. I know there are callers who believe in that. I think that requires too much. We have too many things in the air as it is, trying to keep track of who's with who, where we are in the square, what's happening success-wise on the floor. I only worry about where the dancers are when it's time to resolve. So if you're a new caller and you're trying to get accomplished at sight calling, and I'm hoping that you've already learned other methods that are more secure, like memory, like writing. In some cases, if you're a unique individual, mental image. I know very few callers who can do that extended period of time, and I admire them for doing it successfully. But even that requires a certain amount of memory and so on, as you all know from Don's book. But when you're at that point, I would encourage you to learn how to sight the dancers to a zero line, a zero box, a across the street box, if you remember from your chicken plucker days, any pick 4 or 5 spots like that you know how to sight call there with the calls that you have in your toolbox. And then make yourself a list of resolutions from those spots. And you can look down at that list and pull a resolve off. The only thing you have to be careful about is making sure what you're pulling, body flow and hand usage, fits the call you just used. But once you've gotten comfortable with that, then even if it's the lines of 4, pass through, bend the line, I need a right and left through now. Here's the next thing. Okay, did I just use right and left through? What hand do I need? That's something that will develop. All of this kind of comes out of analyzing calls and what they do. Caller Lab can provide you a wonderful tool called an analyzing the call sheet. It is a lot of work to do it, but when you've completed that, you know that call inside out, and it allows you to use it. So I've got my resolves over here. I take that pressure off, but over a period of time, you learn those resolves. Eventually, if you use them enough, you're going to recognize, but I don't want you to have just 3 resolves, at each of those spots. You need 10 or 12 so you can mix them up. But over time, it's kind of like the multiplication tables, At some point, we memorize 2 times 2 is 4 and 3 times 2 is 6. But after a while, that actually means something to us. We understand what that means. And the same thing will happen with your resolves. The more you use them, and again, if you hopefully pushing checkers through them, even just for practice, seeing how they work, you'll begin to see these things happen. I remember being very excited the first time I was calling to a group of people, and I looked up and I actually saw all 8 circulate right and left grand. I was so excited. It's there it is, and or the ever popular, and I know many of us have done this, you're calling on, you're doing fine, you say, boys run. Oh, damn. Boys run again, right and left green, because you missed it. You weren't quite there quick enough, but we see it after the fact. But as a newer caller, that is so often the challenge, and we also often bury ourselves. Another thing for new callers, if you're learning how to sight call, and again, I can't stress this enough, I don't think that's where you should start. But if you are looking if you suddenly find yourself stuck, and know this is going to sound ultra simple, but I've seen it work in caller schools many times, or if you're coaching somebody and they're stuck, offer them this. Make it look different. Don't try to say Alaman left right here. You don't know quite where you are, or you're not sure what to call next. Maybe you're not resolving, but you're stuck. And maybe they even put up a list of calls for you. Here's calls at mainstream from lines. Here's calls from columns. I've seen new callers especially freeze up on that. They're stuck. Make it. What can you do to make it look different? And what I mean by that is, if you have a line of 4 facing and they say right and left through, does it really look different? Well, only a little bit. But if you touch a quarter, all of a sudden that formation looks completely different, and it frees your brain. You'll call something, it looks different, and all of a sudden your mind will kick in and start to offer you other calls. It works, and I recommend it to any of you who are teaching and any who are new callers trying to sight call. You feel yourself stuck, just make the square look different, and I think you'll find that it frees up and allows you to do a little bit more. Sight calling is a method that, as I said, allows me to stay connected to the floor, and I can see where weaknesses are and what I can do to help improve. I can adjust my timing when I need to. If you've ever seen a caller who truly reads, I've seen this happen, where a caller will be reading every word and not realize that half or more of his floor is broken down. People end up saying, hey, look at us. We're not doing anything. You're learning the sight call. You do not watch one square. You need to watch more than one square because you need to know what's happening to the whole floor. Can you memorize all those squares? Of course not. Even you can't probably memorize 4 squares or who belongs with whom. Write it down. Even with the dancers that you know, if you're in the habit of writing down corners and partners, your pairings that you need, write it down. It's a safety net. Often you won't even need it because it's there. And I've watched some of the best choreographers you've ever seen, who's ever come across the planet. And they write it down every time. It's a habit. It's important. Write it down quickly. Don't try to write down 5 squares. Figure out how many you can comfortably believe you can remember. Jot that down. Or if you know you've got that square locked, I know who they are, then write down 2. If you have time, write down 3. But it's there. It'll help you in a variety of ways. If you do get lost, or what happens if your pilot square goes down? You only wrote down 1 square. Looking around, maybe they're all wearing matching costumes that night. Well, now you're in trouble. It is not a bad thing when necessary to ask for help from the floor for a corner, in my opinion, but you can't do it all the time. You can't be all night long saying, I need a corner. Somebody give me a corner. Hey, Frank, who's your corner? Occasionally, if you need it, it's not terrible. And if you can resolve the square once you have that, that's fine. I can remember seriously going someplace I'd never called for. I didn't know the most of the dancers. I knew one or two people in the room. And I got lost big time because I made the error. I didn't write it down. And I'm calling along. I just plain forgot. And I'm stuck. And so I said, can somebody give me a corner? Well, apparently nobody ever asked these dancers that question before, because I might as well have been speaking Swahili. I mean, just nothing. And so I asked again, could somebody point to your corner? And the third time I said, could anybody in the room point to who your original corner was? And this man about 3 squares back on the left, he pointed. And I said, God bless you, sir. Now tell me who your partner is. I didn't know that either, of course. But the dancers all got a laugh, and I resolved the squares and on we went. But again, it can happen that way. I heard one caller at one time, he knew some of the dancers, and he said, Fred, corner partner first. and poor Fred said, what did he say? And instead of just saying, do them one at a time. No, corner partner first. I've never forgotten that. And unfortunately, I've never said it. But these are things that you can run into. Another thing, if you're sight calling, and you're lost, the dancers know pretty quickly when you're searching. I'd rather see you ask and resolve. And if not, cut your losses quicker. Get out, square the sets, start over, get the people back dancing. There's no value in being on a career opportunity finding a corner. You can go on and on and on. The dancers know, the dancers realize it, and then they'll start helping you. Not always correctly, but they'll all try to help. So you need to get it out of that. Experienced dancers say, oh, he's lost. He's looking. Now, if you're lucky and you get another caller on the floor who knows you get an eye, he'll know you're lost, and he might help land you. I've had some friends do that for me. Give me like, you're crossed or some symbol indication that that's the only problem. Or if you're promenading and you've crossed the dancers and don't realize it, and somebody gives you this, even some of your dancers could tell you. And then you need to have some ways to correct that other than bend the line right and left through out of man left. It would be kind of like, you're in a promenade, heads wheel around. Oh, I'm crossed. What can I do from there? Have, a number of things, would be helpful. But anyway, these are things that do happen. They're real. Most of us have experienced that, and so how do we deal with it in a nice way for the advantage of the dancers? I think that's important. It's most important. They're there to have a good time. They're there to have fun. And of course, we all know the stress that we've had on choreography. And the genie's out of the bottle, I'm afraid, on that. I don't think we can put it back. A dear friend of mine is Jim Mayo. He contends there's no such thing as board dancers, only board callers. I don't agree with that completely. I would love to have 10 squares and 10 clubs in my area who met on a Saturday night that had 20 or 30 squares, and all they did was start through, dive through, pass through, slide through, past the ocean, recycle, out of man left, over and over and over again. No anticipation. All anticipation is perfectly allowed, perfectly expected. Dancers are comfortable with it. They don't want to be tested. They don't want to have uncertainty. That's great. And I'll take the percentage of dancers who want more. If I want to call, formations or position or all position, DVD, whatever phrase you want to apply to it, for example, for plus. All right, I'll take that small percentage. And how do you know when that might be going on? If you suddenly see some of your best dancers slipping into the back, squaring up with all guys in a square, or everybody's half sashayed to dance, they're entertaining themselves. They're not getting enough. They want something more. Now, we all probably know callers who've been calling the same dance for 30 years. They'll retain a certain number of people, but over time, we'll quite possibly lose them from the activity, or they'll move on. I had a caller in our area in the time. He's very, very talented, advanced and challenge caller. And that's where he focused his energies. And this was at the time when advanced and challenge were considered bad. I mean, callers who are calling today that I know of who call those two programs, C1 and advanced, will stand up and would stand up on the stage and tell their dancers, don't get involved in that. That's bad stuff. They're all now doing that because they're chasing dancers. But one of the local callers was a very, very good party caller, very good teacher. He was a good mainstream and plus caller. He did not do anything that was positional. And this is long before we had such a thing as standard applications. And that's a whole nother bailiwick we can save. But he went to this other caller and said, you're stealing my best dancers. And he said, I'm really not. This caller was a friend of mine, and I wish he'd been a little more tactful. But what he chose to say was, no, I'm not stealing your dancers. I'm teaching your dropouts, which did not go over well, as you might imagine. But there is a certain amount of truth in it. These people are looking for something that you're not wanting to offer. It doesn't mean you're not able to offer it. You know, you've made a decision that this is what you want to do, and that's fine. If you want to offer more, that's certainly up to you. If you want to start a class, a next program, you could do it. Go ahead. But I'm not sending the answers in to recruit from you. I'm not sending flyers, nothing like that. But people are looking for more, and eventually they're going to step away from either you or the whole activity. So that was his answer to that. They told us a long time ago, 1969, I was told there's a place for everybody in square dancing, ages 8 to 80 or beyond. And I believe that, but I don't believe it's necessarily true. Everybody in the same hall under the same roof at the same time. It used to be, you say you're going to have a seniors club. That was heresy. How dare you? How dare you say that? You're going to have a seniors club where you're going to call the same kind of material, but you're going to call slower. And people were offended, and the mere idea of it was terrible. But we can have seniors of everything else. We have it in professional sports. We have the seniors tours and so on, but in square dancing, not good. Now we see it in nursing home, retirement homes, or assisted living facilities, that type of thing. But it's still not generally considered. You don't see a whole lot of people saying, here's our seniors club. Occasionally some daytime clubs will, because people who don't want to drive at night any longer, we'll see that. But there's a place, and I tell callers, don't try to own dancers. You want to surround yourself with dancers who love you. Who doesn't want to be surrounded by people who love you and what you do? And I believe that's true. So you can't own them, and you can't guilt them into staying with you or going to your events only. What's the old thing? If you love them, let them go, they'll come back. I think there's some truth in that. So in terms of site calling, to kind of wrap this part of the discussion up, and I want to open it up to other comments. Again, I keep stepping back to modules because I think they're a critical tool especially for new callers to use, not just in flow. But I was talking for a moment, I mentioned about site before resolution. You need to have an idea of what you want to do in the tip that you're about to call, whether you're emphasizing a certain call, if you're following up on a workshop piece of material, practicing type things, or if you found a spot where the dancers are having trouble. Then in that situation, all right, this tip, I need to work on that, but still make it a dance. And so how are you going to do that? What calls are you going to use for that? One of the pitfalls that I fell into, and I never mind telling stories on myself because hopefully I've learned from them. I tend to have a lot of density of calls. If I'm calling plus, you're going to hear a lot of plus calls in the tip. If I'm calling mainstream, you're going to hear a lot of mainstream calls. At a plus dance, you're not going to hear a lot of mainstream and an occasional plus call dropped in, because I don't think that's the program. So how do I do that? If I'm planning and I'm site calling, I need to know what tools I need, what calls I need to use to put together to work on what I'm trying to get done in that tip. It's part of programming, but you have to have the tools to back it up. How do you get those? Learning what the calls actually do and thinking in that language. Going back to the idea of it being a language, you might want to think of that in terms of doing a tip. You can have, the paragraphs that lead up to the end of the story you're going to tell in that tip, or what your plan was to accomplish in that tip. And so we have our little phrases, our little modules that make up our phrases. Another way to think of that, we have these words in our language like the, to, and the, and for. Those are what link the modules together, for what we're trying to accomplish. And those are tools that are worthwhile using. Again, citing, rather reading, don't read, scan, learn how to scan. Some of the software programs now will let you do that by highlighting the line you're on. You hit a space bar, it'll drop down to the next line. Helpful tool if you're learning how to scan and have to use written material. Whatever combination you use, as long as it works for the dancers and you're aware of what's happening and not doing any damage, and they like it, it's great. I'm going to tell one story. I try not to tell too many war stories because I don't want to take up your time. But this is one story. Since we have folks here from Sweden, you might appreciate this. It was at a clinic that two callers were running at the Ericsson Festival, in which I've called a number of times and been on. And at this panel, the two presenters were Sandy Bryant and Ann Ubelacher. And you may not know them. Ann is one of the very best readers out there, in my opinion. She is aware of what's happening on the floor. She knows what her material does, how it works, and so on. But she's really good at it. And unless you were watching, you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't tend to know that she was reading. Sandy Bryant is a brilliant sight caller, but occasionally reads. And when she's reading, you don't necessarily know it. And at that time, Dave Wilson was living in the country and was an active caller there, but he was not on the staff. But he attended this festival and he attended the clinic. And unfortunately, some caller who I don't know, local to Sweden, stood up and said, he actually said to Ann, "You have no business calling festivals." And she was very startled and stunned. What are you supposed to, how do you react to that? And she said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you read all your material." She said, "Yeah, I do use that technique. It works for me. But I do know what's happening on the floor." And Sandy stepped in and said, "I read also." And he said, "Oh, no, you don't." She said, "Yeah, I do. You just haven't always seen it. You didn't always pick up on how I did it." But yeah, and this one a little bit, and it was very awkward. And to Dave's great credit, he stood up and said this caller by name. Before he spoke to him, he said to Ann, "How many festivals and weekends do you do a year?" And said 35 to 40, maybe sometimes as much as 45 in a hard year, but about that. And he turned and looked at his other caller and said, "How many do you do?" And this caller just sat down. He didn't say a word. But the point was proven. She made it work. She makes it work. She's successful at it. So you can, but you can't do it without being aware of what's happening on the floor. And also, she wrote all that material. So she knows what it does. She knows about body flow and hand usage and making it work, as well as delivery. At this point, I'd like to take a pause and if anybody has any questions, challenges, things they want to offer into what we've talked about so far, if that's okay with Don. Don says, thumbs up. Anybody want to share anything, ideas?
Oh, Don did unmute himself. There we go.
Well, if nobody, Dan, you're going to talk? Go ahead.
I was just going to comment. You made a little nugget there about what is the story you're telling. And back in a previous life, I spent a couple of years working for a little company called Pixar that you might have heard of, and became extremely aware of putting narrative arcs into things, giving people that dark moment and that redemption and that next, that conclusion. And I'm, been thinking about that in the context of square dancing. And there's some obvious stuff there, but I'm always interested in a little bit more diving into that.
Well, you realize, of course, to me, that now you're bordering into that whole subject line of showmanship
Yes.
and entertaining, and how do we do that, and how do we do it, with a variety of tools. Can you do it with choreography? There are ways, certainly. Can you do it with other approaches, of course, in showmanship and entertainment, depending on who you are? I'm not a rubber chicken guy, that's not the kind of comedy that I work with. But speaking of comedy, we can have a good time with dancers by being aware of what's happening on the floor. Now, as dancers become more choreographically sophisticated, I don't mean they know more calls. I mean that they become more sophisticated in that they are comfortable in the calls that they know, and things happen on the floor. Or if you make a mistake yourself and they realize that they'll know when it's funny, and they'll know how to laugh, and you can play off of that. If you have that interaction, if you're not watching the floor, you won't know. Folks that for a long time now, the dancers who dance to me regularly would say in the back of the room, "Careful what you say. He hears everything." Well, of course I don't hear everything, but we see things happen. Contextually, I can see something that happened in the floor, and I can make a comment. And very often, if something happens in one square, it very well could happen in another. And so it can be universal. I don't tell jokes in the microphone. It's just too dangerous. It's just too easy, to offend somebody when you don't even mean it. One of the strangest experiences of my life had nothing to do with a joke. I had a new singing call at the time that I had recorded. We were getting ready to release it. And it was based on the country western song, Jose Cuervo, "You Are a Friend of Mine." And I announced it that way. This is brand new. I hope you enjoy it. I put it on. And at the end of the tip, I had a lady come up to me who happened to be the chairman of their big New Year's Eve dance, who was thinking about hiring me, to say, "How dare you use that kind of language in public and at a swear dance?" I didn't know what she was talking about. I did not have an inkling. And I told her, I said, "Man, I don't understand. And if I'm doing something wrong here, I want to know about it before we go press a whole bunch of records and send them out. What am I missing?" I don't use that kind of language. I can't tell you. Man, could your husband tell me? He doesn't talk like that either. I don't know what the hell she heard. There's nothing in the lyrics that are lewd. There's no bad language in it. The only thing I could ever attend to was the fact that it did have to do with drinking. But come on, how far do we go? And so she would not be cooperative at all, but she said, you shouldn't ever do such a thing. You can't judge how people are going to react to stuff, and so if you think that was weird, what if we did tell a joke if somebody took offense? Slightly off color. So it's just better to be safe. Save it for the after party. The best story I ever heard on that was the caller, Bob Fisk. He was a fine caller, fine singer, and he was just making his mark on the festival circuit. He told me this story himself. He said, so I figured, well, after party, we're all around somebody's room, or all sitting around there telling stories. The later it got, the bluer the stories got, a little bit rough. And decided, well, all the other callers are telling stories. I guess I'm supposed to tell a joke. And he told one that was much weaker, much softer than any of the stories that had been told recently. And there was a laugh and whatever. But at the end of the dance, end of the after party, the callers were standing by the door saying goodnight to everybody. And as Bob puts it, and Bob was about 6'4", barrel-chested, ex-Marine. He's standing up there, and this little old grandmother comes up. She looks up at him and she says, "Mr. Fisk, you are wonderful, but you have a foul mouth." And she walked out the door. And Bob told me, he said, "I knew right then I'm the wrong guy to tell jokes." And he never told another joke at the after party because somebody could react that way. And so enough about not telling jokes. You can play off of humorous things that happen in the room. You don't embarrass people. Not everybody knows your personality. Everybody in this room probably knows or have heard of Lee Coutman. I knew Lee well. Lee was a friend. I understood Lee. I understood his sense of humor. Not everybody did. And sometimes even he forgot about how important tonality is of what things sound like. We can look at a dog and say, what a good dog, what a stupid, ugly, ignorant dog you are. And you get the right tone, he's wagging his tail, he's happy. The lady who's dancing, not doing terribly well. She was new to a program, and so I was helping her, and Lee from the microphone said, "Excuse me, ma'am." And she looked up, "Yeah, do you drive?" And she said, well, yeah. He said, "Well, you shouldn't." The lady left the hall in tears. She got over it. She came back. He didn't mean to be mean, and yet he was. The wrong tonality, wrong timing, wrong person. He had been forewarned that there were new dancers to that program in the room. It was a mistake. He messed up, but he was not a malicious person. So we all have to be careful how we play and watch our tonality and things like that, which has nothing to do with sight calling, but it's kind of lapsing over into Dan's concerns about how can we entertain and the narrative type approach. What story do we want to tell? I don't want to, there's so many of our things that overlap, like showmanship overlapping into, like, do you rewrite lyrics for singing calls for purposes? I do. I like doing that. I can write it for a special occasion. I might write a new set of lyrics, for people having an anniversary or something, put their names in, so on. It's fine. Or if a song comes along that some people are uncomfortable with the lyric. It was the one that you guys recorded down in Australia. Not I've never been so loved in all my life. The other one, I've got you laying out on the floor and you think I've loved you all I can. I'm going to love you a little bit more. There are parts of this in our country that I would not use that lyric. In Bible Belt type areas, they would not respond well. But I love the music. I wrote a whole new set of lyrics for it. And I actually have had other callers come up. Where'd you get those? I wrote them. Would you share them? Sure. Give them the lyrics to use, just because I like the music so much, but I wasn't comfortable using that everywhere. I know callers who do and never had any problems. Yes, sir. Brian, start over here. Brian's first, and then I see that Helen wants to speak, and Chris. I'll stop talking and give it to you.
I was just going to say something about telling jokes. I think you've got to be careful. I tell jokes occasionally from the stage, but I'm very careful about the sort of jokes that I tell. And usually I get the comment back from the dancers that I shouldn't change my day job. They think the jokes they're all right, but I used to work with a guy here who unfortunately is not with us anymore, a really nice caller, and he had a really neat way of telling the dancers on the floor that they'd made a mistake. He used to say, "What you did was really, really nice, but what I had in mind was something totally different to what you did."
Right.
Which is, sort of really nice.
Absolutely. It's not a joke, but he's interacting with what's happening on the floor, because chances are more than one square did that type of thing. Yeah. And so the whole room can appreciate that.
And it's just fun. And just quickly going back to everybody, can you just point to your corner or where's your partner? I was working with a well-known American caller at one stage, and he had something that I learned, and I don't use it very often because I use quite a lot of modules, so I'm usually sure of where I am. But he said at one stage he was completely lost, and he said, "Everybody point to your original partner. Now swinger and promenade." It's a fun way of getting out of it.
Scatter, circulate within your square.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
And then Chris.
I want to interject one thing because Brian brought up something that you mentioned about pointing to your corner or pointing to your partner. Just a thing that really helped me when I did that. I find when you say point to your corner, everybody's looking around and trying to remember. What I find more effective is I get them to somebody that it's either their corner or they're out of sequence, and I'll say, "Is that your corner?" Because they can tell the person they're looking at. They've got a better chance of telling the person they're looking at, "Is that your corner?" If it is, I'm golden. If it's not, I know that the other one is, and I know enough about the square. I just couldn't remember which of the side women was that headman's corner or something.
Mm-hmm.
So by saying, is that your corner, people seem to be able to respond much more quickly. Just a quick thing I want to throw in. Helen, go for it.
I don't think, I didn't want to say something. I was probably just fixing my hair. So go on.
Well, it's lovely.
Thank you.
Chris?
Oh, well, boy, I had a bunch of things going by. About the corner thing, I know that on occasion I've asked, who's your corner? And they had no idea. They're like, we don't know. And I'd be like, good, circle left. But the on the topic of songs that are a little could be inappropriate for some places, there were a lot of people. I never used this song, but I know there were a lot of people who did not like, women in particular, did not like the song that had the lyric, I like my women on the trashy side. There was a sort of a tongue-in-cheek country hit at the time, and they turned it into a singing call. And I know that torqued off a lot of women. They didn't appreciate that at all. It wouldn't have been I wouldn't have ever sung that myself anyway. It's not it didn't seem like the right thing for me. But anyway, to totally reiterate one of the things that you were talking about with the writing and the call analysis sheets, for people to learn to do site calling and they wonder, how is it that you guys see these things, these combinations, how all that stuff works. It's a lot of it is often because the site callers spend a lot of time writing material. Whether or not you actually take that material and read it to the floor, or whether you just write it to work things out or whatever. I mean, that's a huge training and practice.
Let me jump in right there, Chris, because I'm so glad you said that. I coined a phrase a while back that I've been using in caller schools for a long time, and I tell it this flat out: you have to write to cite. You have to write to cite. You don't necessarily have, all of us don't have photographic memories or eidetic memories, but we often have parts of that in our mind. If we're sitting around talking and I say, hey guys, what do you think about this combination? I might not be able to give you every piece of the whole sequence, but I can use this combination and I can create that, and I can create it on the floor. I can only do that because I have seen it before. I have written it. I've watched, I've looked at it. Again, this is going to go back to next week's thing in terms of more and more about writing, and as well as a couple other topics. But the fact is true, and Chris is right on the mark. We recreate things that we've written. Mike Jacobs, the late Mike Jacobs, was brilliant at that, and he did have an eidetic memory, which is almost like a photographic memory. If he's written something, he can pretty much remember it verbatim. And he also had the skill sets of being able to say, if square breaks down on something, he can put them right back in exactly the same spot to let him look at it again. All right, and it's a wonderful talent. Some of the very best callers we know have terrific memories. The late Jerry Story, Tony Oxidine, these guys had more singing call figures that you'll hear at a dance, not on their records, but at a dance, they'll have more singing call figures than most of us have ever put together in our lives, and right at the top of their head, just like that. As well as being able to memorize good resolves. It's a great tool if you have it. I unfortunately didn't get that gene. I don't have a great memory, so I try to create when I need to. But again, a lot of writing, and I don't care what the program is. I was flattered to be asked to call the Northwest Teen Competition mystery caller thing one time. Those overseas who don't know about it, it's been going on about 55 years, and they have 3 different levels of age groups, and they compete. And part of the competition is they have stopwatches on each square. Somebody's watching. Square breaks, they stop the watch. They reassemble, they start dancing, and they keep on going. The people who get the most dance time win. But this material is insane. They want it hard. They asked for it specifically to make it hard. I wrote every bit of it. The highest level is the highest program is plus. And I had to write every bit of it. And I got together my best advanced and challenged the answers because I had to record it and send it in. And I had to walk them through all of it several times before I could just call it. It was that out there, you know. And then the sad part is I can't use it anywhere else. It's done. I don't want to do it again, you know, but you do see things, you see ideas. And, you know, pay attention to this, plus callers. You may have some ideas at plus that you wouldn't necessarily remember to think, you know, hey, I could do that at mainstream. Not a plus call, but an idea that you developed when you were writing some plus or creating some plus thoughts. You might say, I can translate that. I can transition that over to mainstream. We often will do that, you know, at different programs. It'll give you ideas. The more you write, the more ideas you're going to have. Again, this will come up next time on writing, and I'll repeat myself next time. So forgive me for that. But I believe that there's two questions you can ask yourself if you are writing choreography that will guarantee you of never running out of new material. The first question is, what happens if? So if you're working with checkers and you have an idea, you've written down whatever, you know, what happens if, and you test it. And the second question is, what else can I do from here? So you're in a place, you have an idea, fine. Yeah, that'll work, fine. But what else can I do from here? You're almost doing a clinic for yourself the way you do it at callers clinics, where they'll go around the room and say, give me a call for the square. Now you give me a call, you give me a call. You're doing that with yourself. What else can I do from here? You know, and will it work? Is it valuable? That kind of thing expands your thinking. And one of the reasons that I want to continue writing choreography, I have a history in my family of Alzheimer's. My father had it. His older sister had it. I'm scared to death to have it. I don't read as much as I used to. They tell us it's important to do that to help forestall dementias. And so I'm not reading, but choreography, writing choreography is a simple thing of stimulation. And I had read before that people who read a lot are about 41% less likely to get engaged in dementia. But I've seen two new studies, and knowing Clark, he'll help me find them because I can't quote you, Clark, where they are, but you would know, or you'll find them. Both are saying that people who dance, any kind of dance, are 71% or 72% less likely to suffer dementia. This should be our banner for square dancing, guys, because we incorporate, obviously, the elements of thinking, body movement, and social. I mean, these are all positive skills, you know, people need to interact with other people and so on. So I'm looking to get specifics on those studies. I want to start putting them out there because in our country, at least, are probably our best potential market are empty nesters. The kids are gone, folks are looking for something to do. We also have two dancers who now moved from New Mexico to our area. Clark, you might have been there. They did a presentation at Color Lab on the research work that they've done and the impact that it's had on people mentally and physically from dancing. Unfortunately, they needed another $400,000 to finish do the study properly. And of course, I didn't have it, and Clark didn't have any loose change either that day, so they didn't get it from us. But I wouldn't mind our foundation trying to help fund them, some of it anyway. But interesting, 71% dancing.
I wanted to maybe have some bad news for our newer dancers, our newer callers. There's no silver bullet.
Correct.
It takes experience and practice and practice and experience. A personal thing is, I remember I was pretty well experienced already, I thought. And Bill Peters, the late Bill Peters, used to talk about yet another way of resolution. It was called, now I can't remember what it was, something to do with photography. But speaking of bad memories.
Oh, snapshot?
Snapshot. He would just look at the floor and say, oh, I got to do this to get him there. And I used to think, how the heck does he see? You know, I started with mental image after reading the wrong stuff and evolved into sight calling. And I still consider myself a sight caller with the knowledge of mental image helping. But I was wondering, how do you just see more than just one person, or how do you see more than four people? And he used to look at the floor, take a snapshot, and resolve it. And I found after years and years and years of experience, I can do that pretty well. All of a sudden, with enough experience, I could see it. No silver bullet, years of experience. Have faith, it will probably come. I can't guarantee that, but don't expect it right away. Practice, experience, practice.
When I was told about that idea of a snapshot resolution, it was in conjunction with the squares. My pilot squares are about to go down, right on the verge. And I snap where they are in my mind. I see that. And then I don't worry about watching the other squares. I mean, I'm aware of the floor movement, but I'm focused in my mind, more of a mental image thing, Don, where in my mind, that's where they were. What do I need to make that happen for the quickest resolve possible? And that will come, as Don says, in time. You'll be able to use that, not necessarily every time, but there'll be times when, oh man, I got to get them out of this. Okay, they're there. What do I need to do? Put them back together to normalize that type of thing. Another thing on citing, if you find yourself stuck, and I said to you about making it look different, but here's another little trick. If you're stuck and you're not sure how to get out of what you've gotten yourself into, most of the time we start thinking complexity. We start thinking really complicated things because we're in a complicated spot. Try not to do that. Try to think simple. What's the simplest thing I can do to normalize? Once you're in a normal, recognizable formation, then chances are really good that you'll be able to work your way out of it. I had a student, a very bright young lady from California. She was a preteen, but she saw choreography better than anybody in the room. And she only called up through mainstream and was just starting to learn plus, but she was better than callers who've been calling 10 years. I mean, she really was amazing. And so at one point I decided, I told her I'm going to push you a little bit now in a choreo exercise. And I put her in tidal wave, and I had the centers of each side run, and the new centers do a hinge, and the ones who had done the run do a U-turn back. So basically I had a facing diamond, but oriented that way rather than the normal orientation from parallel to face line to the center's hinge. And even the ends turn back, even that's a facing diamond, but it's easier than the one when you set it up out of the tidal formation. And she was stuck. I mean, she was like, and I said, you want some help? And she said, no, give me a minute, but then she said, well, this isn't mainstream because of the diamonds. And I said, you're right, it's not. What are you going to do about it? What if you said this by mistake and you found yourself there, and maybe you don't even remember how you got there? What are you going to do? And she started processing. I said, think simple. Think as simple as you can. And bless her heart, she said centers of each side, centers hinge. She had a two-face line on each side. All of a sudden she recognized it. She knew what to do. She go on. Think simple. It sounds simple to say it, but it's not always simple to do. But keeping your wits about you. I'm going to tell a story right now on Clark. I'm not telling this to embarrass you, Clark. It's something I've always admired that I saw you do.
Don, can I interrupt for just a second? Because this would be a great way to start the second. But I've noticed the big hand is on the 12. And at this point, I usually jump in and thank Dan for the technical hosting of this thing.
You bet.
Thank you all for attending and adding to the conversation. If any of you have to leave because you've only designated an hour for the session, you're not going to offend anybody by leaving. A really big thanks to John Marshall for getting us thinking this evening.
Appreciate that.
A couple of announcements. As John has mentioned, our speaker next week will be a guy from Virginia named John Marshall, speaking on a different topic. The 2 following weeks, we will not be having sessions. One is a long weekend in the U.S., and I will be away. The following weekend, Dan is going to be away, but we will be back in a month or so trying to figure out what to do again. Did I forget something? I don't think so. So now, as I usually say, let's go on to the best part of it. I always say that, which is wrong. It's not the best part. John's presentation is the best part. Let's go on to another good part and continue the conversation. John, tell your story about Clark.
Okay. Again, anybody does have to leave. I thank you for your time again. I appreciate you being here. I'm always flattered if callers will take time to hear what I have to say. You know, even if they dismiss most of it, I'm still pleased that you gave me that chance. So thank you for that. Keeping control of yourself, whether you're a new caller or a very experienced caller, sometimes we're thrown. You know, we're sometimes put into tricky spots. Some of the worst probably is having a dancer for an illness on the floor, and there's no formula for that that's right. That's an instinctive thing for another time. But I watched Clark. He was calling in the Plus Hall at the National Square Dance Convention in Long Beach. And his MC had accidentally abandoned him. He thought he knew Clark, our great experienced caller. He wasn't worried about Clark. So after he was introduced, he left the stage and was chatting. And I was watching what Clark was doing. And Clark doesn't cite a lot, especially in areas where he doesn't do a lot of calling. He doesn't do a lot of plus calling. He does some, and I also know he does father, daughter, Girl Scout party dinners, dances, and so on. And I also know he calls all the way to C4, which is a world beyond my ken. I think it's about as close to square dancing as curling is. But they tell me I have half a C4 brain, which is really dangerous. But Clark was going to the floor, and first off, there hadn't been a good sound check. Big floor. I mean, you know, they're probably 60 squares on the floor, Clark, 80, something like that. And some people weren't hearing. And Clark's first sequence, the opener, was heads fan the top. Now I cringed, and exactly what I thought would happen happened. And you know, there was squares breaking down left and right, and the ones who couldn't hear decided that was the only reason they didn't do the call, which was baloney. They would have missed it anyway. But they're waving handkerchiefs and all that. And here's Clark. And I turned to his MC and I said, "Hey, get up there. You know, he needs, you know, some assistance on the sound." So they can, and Clark, totally unfazed. "I understand some of you are having a problem hearing me. We're working on getting that taken care of. Give us just a moment and we'll be right with you." I mean, I've seen callers walk off the stage at a national when that kind of thing happens. And Clark's like saying, "You'll be fine. Just a second, guys. We'll straighten you out." And what was equally impressive, he started over with the exact same sequence, and how he started, heads, step to a wave, fan the top. And everybody got it. Now, not only did he figure out what he needed to do under all that pressure, but he wasn't afraid to keep the same sequence. I got to tell you something, guys. That takes some stalwart abilities and control of yourself and your emotions and the time around you, and confidence in what you know how to do. I was very impressed, Clark. To this day, I've told that story because it's a very impressive thing for a person to be able to do. And that's why I said I don't say it to embarrass you at all. You know, you fixed it. You took care of it. You handled it. I mean, after all, it's only 60 squares. Who cares? You know, in a room bigger than most of us ever call in, the sound's completely different. By the way, if you find yourself in that situation where you're having the opportunity at a big festival and you're scheduled to call, even if it's just a tip, go into the room beforehand, get comfortable in the room, make it your own, get a sense of the sound. If you can, get up on the steps leading to the stage so you're closer to where you will be when you call, see what it sounds like, see what it feels like. You're going to do a better job. You're going to be more comfortable if you do that first when you can. Something I learned a long time ago. It helps. It gives you an advantage. Just walking into a huge hall cold and say, "Here I go. You're used to calling to 2 or 3 spares and you got 60 out there. and the ceilings are 30, 40 feet high, and it's a whole different animal. But you can get ahead of it. And so that's a very positive story for someone handling a stressful situation quite well.
Should we hear Clark's side of that story, or?
Clark says, I don't remember this at all.
No, I remember calling at some national convention. Normally, I wouldn't schedule myself in the plus hall. I forget how that happened, but I definitely wouldn't site call that. I would use written material. I know from experience at New England Convention that for all these things, I need to take my easiest written material. But obviously, starting out with a head span the top, I usually start with an opening biggie, a short sequence. And, you know, that isn't going to be super successful. So my ability to grade and have really easy material at, say, mainstream or plus isn't very good. And I have a limited toolbox when I'm doing something like that. So when I'm calling with written material, and I don't have enough table space to lay out my cards, I'm usually scanning for which card I want to do next based on how the dancers did. But getting the whole thing started, like if you can't even get them through the first sequence, you know you're in trouble. And you also know that I don't have a lot of flexibility. It's not like I'm just going to say, forget the written material. I'm just going to do a couple of memorized sequences that I know are my old standby successful ones, because I don't have that in my toolbox. So yeah, it was a little bit of a nerve-wracking situation. And yes, you're right. The sound sounds very different, et cetera, et cetera. While I have the floor, I put something in the beginning of the chat as a partial attempt to answer Don's how do you have a sequence tell a story comment. And this is the one that mentions Lynette. Lynette's a well-known, very talented challenge caller, but she wrote down a while ago her opinions on what is good and bad flow. And we often have discussions in these kinds of sessions about flow and let's keep the dancers moving and wind in your face, etc. But what is good flow and what causes it and so forth? You hear opinions, but you don't hear what Lynette said very often. So I thought it was worth putting it in the chat in case people happen to go there. And she basically talks about, for each call, there's kind of a center of rotation, and she tries to move that center of rotation call by call. I'll stop because I see hands waving.
The hands waving are that it's 2 a.m. where Brian is, and he's heading off to bed, and I was just saying goodnight, and he was saying goodnight.
You know, Clark, on that, I want to point something out. A lot of folks, we see from the dancer side, we see things like so-and-so, oh, he's a challenge caller. Can he call plus? They don't, you know, and then other people say, well, of course, he can call everything. Think about it this way. I'm back to the language skills. Clark has 1,000 words square dance vocabulary. I have a 400 word, whatever. But for Clark to go and call, he has to give up. If he's going to call mainstream or plus, he's giving up 80 or 90% of his vocabulary. Now, make sentences out of that. Try it with in your own native tongue. Take away, you know, half, you know, or more of your available words, and then go ahead and make intelligible sentences that can get your message across. It's not easy, and that's where, as I mentioned to you, he also does father-daughter Girl Scout type thing, party dinners, you know, dances, and he's had to do that. Vic Cedar had to do that. Vic started calling at C4, which is absolutely frightening, but he did. But he learned how to bring it down to be able to teach beginners and whatever. That's a challenge for them. The rest of us are working the other direction as we try to expand our vocabularies and use them. And what do? You've just been thrown into this pit where all of a sudden it's not a vocabulary you get to use very often. You know, if you rarely call mainstream, you call, maybe you're doing all your calling, most you're calling at plus or at A1. Okay, here's a mainstream weekend. You've been asked to call this whole weekend, 5 sessions of mainstream. And oh, by the way, you can't teach more than 3 or 4 calls at the most. How do you feel about doing that? You want to think about that. You know, if you don't do a lot of mainstream, that's a challenge, you know, type thing. So it works in both directions. Chris?
Well, I was going to say that something that new callers, especially, I guess, maybe don't appreciate a lot of, and it has to do with calling on the different programs or levels or whatever you want to call them. They all have a different flavor. It's not even just the vocabulary of the calls, but it's the kind of stories that you tell and the kind of things that you do with the calls that that vary a lot between, you know, I'm not so sure it's that different between mainstream and plus, but say plus and advanced, very different kind of things go on there, and also very different kind of things go on at challenge. One problem that I think that people who have learned to call the higher levels first, working downwards, is they sort of try to call challenge at all the levels. And there can be a place for that kind of thing as a sort of a specialty session or something, or that might just be your thing if that's just really what you want to do. But there's a flavor to each of the different levels, and the kind of constructs and the kind of sentences and things that the dancers are used to at those different levels. And you know, it'll vary depending on the caller and depending on the floor or whatever. But there's definite I don't know if we want to call them dialects in keeping with the language analogy, but there's even more to it than just the words, just the calls that you have available.
I want to go back to something that John said an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, and agree with part of it, and not disagree, but show an interesting contrast. John said, stay connected with the floor. When you're sight calling, when you're reading, you're looking down and not watching the floor. When you're sight calling, you can be watching the floor. Staying connected with the whole floor, you know, not just keeping one square dancing, etc., is very important. It's important for sight timing and all sorts of other things. The thing that I differ with John, and it's just a personal thing, he and I both complain about not having good memories. I have trouble, and people talk about memorizing who started with whom in 4 squares. I have troubles memorizing just one, and even with writing down and that kind of thing. I mean, once I got into sight calling, well, I could worry about that 1 square. But as a mental image caller, I would watch the whole floor. I would stay connected with the floor. When I first started shifting to sight, I would stay connected to that 1 square right in front of me and forget that the whole square, not forget, but lose track of what the rest of the floor was doing. So ironically, when John said going to sight from reading makes you more connected with the floor, for me, when I went from mental image to sight, it got me less connected to the floor. And after not too long a period, I realized that was one of the shortcomings of sight that I had to overcome. But it's ironic, the same end result, just a different way of getting there.
To be fair, Don, I've never seen anybody do that. The only callers I've ever seen use mental image, and who I believe were truly using mental image, they didn't watch the floor at all. They were watching, sometimes half the time they had their eyes closed. The other half the time they were sort of looking at the ceiling, tracking the square that was in their head. And I'm not saying that should be, I'm just saying that's all I've ever seen done.
When I mental image call, John, I watch the floor, and rather than totally following a dancer in my head, I will use a dancer on the floor as my key dancer and have him help me figure out where everybody's going and ending up and such. And if
so
they
that's in part sight.
Well, not really. And when he makes a mistake, I can shift to any other square and pick up the person in his position, whether they've made a mistake or not, and vice versa.
So,
This group, by the way, had people, both Daryl and Brian
mhm,
have been doing mental image most of their career, and mostly it. But John, you should take my course in mental image. I'm thinking of one for experienced scholars.
I have no doubt that it would help me.
We'll talk
Don and I have to understand, folks, Don and I are very good friends, good enough to have survived this. I have Don's book, and when I first looked at it and I came back to him and I said, Don, I got to tell you, the very best part of your book is the title, Out of Sight. I thought that was terrific. And I thought that was the best part.
I was
But
going.
we're good enough friends that it did not ruin our relationship.
John and I have the kind of relationship, we don't get together very often, but when we do, we can talk about many other things besides just square dancing. Clark and I have that. Dan and I have that. Alan and I have that too. It's.
So you're telling me you're the common denominator then?
Oh yeah. I just sit back and listen to anything you want to say. Interesting.
Who else can share with us? Yolanda, talk to us from Canada. Tell us what's going on up there.
Actually, I inherited a new, for me, new Square Colors book by J. King.
Uh-huh.
I went into town yesterday and picked it up.
Uh-huh.
Somebody was driving from one city to the other and dropped it off in town.
It's a good book. I've got it, Yolanda. I've only read parts of it, but because I just don't like reading. But everything I've read in it, there were good hints on how to teach specific calls.
Yes. I'll have to figure out what a rip and snort is, though. I have to go and see her, I guess.
You don't need it for your repertoire.
No.
Oh, you are in for such a treat. It is a total crowd pleaser.
I use it at my beginner's dances.
Do you? Yeah.
Yep.
It's not symmetric.
It's not hex either. Have you done it hex? Rip and snort?
Nope.
Yes.
That could take a few minutes, wouldn't it?
And if you see me popping in and out, I've got a dog that's not feeling well, and somebody's shooting a rifle in the back somewhere, and he's scared, and I've got bears, so I have to pop him in and out of the house.
So I take it you don't live downtown.
No, I live right at the edge of town. But they're doing construction, so the bears are not in their regular routine. Yeah. So I can't leave them out.
Speaking of hearing from people we haven't heard from, Mickey, welcome to the group. I know you said you'd be calling a C2 dance and try to listen in your car on the way. Is there any way you can turn leech your audio on and give us your 2 cents worth? Mickey's in Germany. And I guess the answer is no, huh?
No, I just got to figure out I'm driving in the car on the way back home. Can you hear me?
Yes, fine, no problem.
So good to listen to what has been said so far, and I 100% go along with that. And also hello to John. It's been a long time since we met at the Color School.
Yes.
At the Northeast. It was a good time.
Yes.
And yeah.
I'm glad to hear your voice. I take it your calling's going well and you're enjoying it.
Yeah, we picked it up so far again, and had a sea dance for about 5 hours now, and I'm on my way home. And if you keep talking long enough, then I may put the video on as well.
Very good.
Yeah. But I've been listening to the session, and it's good, and I can agree to most everything 100%. And hello to all the others as well.
Great to have you with us, Mickey. I'm glad you asked for the where I guess I saw you on the Australian.
That's great. It's been a while. Yeah.
We're here almost every Saturday. I met Mickey originally at a color school in Germany also. Anyone else?
Don't tell them when, because they wouldn't believe I'm 37 anymore if you would tell when it was.
I don't even remember how long ago that was, Mickey. It was.
I Yeah, it's been a while. It was at the Lochmühle. I think it's over 30
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, it was
I
at
think I guess I was 7.
Actually, I think it was more than 30 years ago because
Yeah.
I've been married for 35 to Gail, and we knew each other for a couple years before that. And if she's come with me to Europe whenever I've done caller schools, and she didn't come to that one, so it must have been before 35 years.
You're making me real old now.
I don't think it was Dawn, Mickey.
Before
you were a kid then. I mean, there was a young, precocious. I remember you and Carsten Nielsen were there together, and in a different class from the rest of the group. 2 young, precocious, very talented callers, and both doing your own thing. I assume many of you know Carsten at this point from Denmark.
Chris, before I give you a shot, because I know you had your hand up, but Mel?
Yes.
I haven't seen you respond to a function at all. Sometimes I thought you were actually, there was just a picture up here I was seeing instead of you're actually being in it. And
oh no, believe me, I'm quite intense with this. And I posted some of the links that what you were talking to with the Alzheimer's study in the chat as well, as well
good.
as the link to the New England Journal.
Well, if you find some good stuff, send it along, will you?
Yeah, it's in the chat. One of the things that I really like what you said is when you said to the person that was host or MC or the senior caller get on stage when somebody's up there having trouble, the fact that they didn't take over or start whispering in the back and basically call the dance third party is so important. And I've heard you speak on that aspect of coaching before in a couple of places, and I thought it absolutely brilliant. And also what you said, that resolution, there's so much to learn before you learn to resolve a square. Learn a technique, take the stress off, then forget it, because there's so much to learn before you even go down that road. So absolutely fantastic. It's always a pleasure.
One of the things that you just mentioned, doing a good job of emceeing is special. And one of the, unfortunately, we've lost him recently, but I'm going to forget his name just that quick. One of the best MCs I ever heard in my life. Clark, who was the guy that was, he owned Ohio before Gary Brown, and he moved to Florida. If I said his name, you'd know it right away. I'm sorry, I'm having a brain cramp.
Jerry Helt.
Jerry Helt.
No.
Okay. Ron Schneider.
Yes, Ron Schneider. Yeah, he was an amazing MC. But, you know, you were talking about not taking over and being like the third party caller, but sometimes it has its place. I watched this happen many years ago at a National Square Dance convention, somewhat akin to what we were talking about. A caller got up and he put on his singing call, and it's all he was doing was a singer. And he got lost. He got lost in the music. He couldn't, the hall was so different, as Clark confirmed, you know, the sound is so different in those situations. And he was nervous in the first place, and he couldn't find his music, couldn't hear it. And the MC actually very quietly moved in behind him and started singing the same song at the right place. Right, but he didn't sing it into a microphone or anything. He was just right behind the guy. So the guy heard that and he keyed in on that, and he got him through it. So that he got him back on track, and they finished the singing call. And I thought it was so beautifully done, because it was so subtle, and most of the floor would not have known unless they were actually staring up there, and they didn't have reason to stare per se. He was just off, connected to the music.
Was that Ron? Was that Ron Schneider?
No, that was not. And I'll think of his name. It was not Burl Maine, but it was someone of that ilk who did that, and I was very impressed at the time. It's a different situation, and how do you handle it? I thought he did a really professional job. Let me tell you, I'm going to touch base on this about working with other callers. You never try to be better than the caller you're working with. You want to compliment that caller. You want to blend with that caller whenever possible. And one of the things that happened to me with, and again, a lot of these things happen at the bigger events. I was at National. I was calling a tip with Randy Dougherty, who, by the way, has been pretty sick. He's in recovery right now. He has cirrhosis of the liver. And he's not a drinker. He never has been. So I don't know. I mean, I don't say he never drinks, but he's not a big drinker at all. He's just never the big party guy. So I don't know what happened, but he's getting better. And other reports, those of you know, Bill Harrison, Bill is very sick with COVID. He had his vaccinations. He was out. He got it at a dance. President of the club thought he had a cold, went to dance anyway. Him, they should just shoot and forget about. But he goes, and then the next day he goes and gets tested. He's positive. And Billy contracted it, and then went to the hospital. They saw him. They sent him home. He was in good spirits and feeling a little rough, but overall okay. And then it turned worse, and he went back to the hospital this past week, 105-degree temperature, and they gave him some kind of an infusion. I don't know. I think it was a myocardial thing for the heart. I'm not sure, and had to send him home again. But he's miserable. He's hurting. He's hurting bad. And, you know, this is one thing that scares us. You know, he was fully vaccinated, you know, doing masks and all that, and he still got it. So it's like, you know, it's all strange world.
John, is Billy seeing emails and such?
Sure.
I'll have to send him. I hadn't heard from him. In fact, he was going to do one of our sessions, and then I hadn't heard from him. Now, like I hadn't heard from several people, but
yeah,
now
he had a rough summer. For one thing, he had some surgeries, and that may have weakened his immune system some. I don't know, but we'll all keep good thoughts for a good guy. You know, like to see that get out of the way. I jumped into my brain, and I wanted to share that with you guys, and it made me lose where I had drifted to. We were doing all
from another caller singing, working with other callers.
Yeah, and as I said, sometimes I know what it was, and so I was calling with Randy, and I was sight calling because one of the squares about the middle of the room had two couples in it that danced to me regularly that I knew. So I'm golden, right? Except that they were, respectively, they were heads. And would have been so much nicer if they'd been, you know, partner, you know, corners and so on. But they weren't. And the other two couples I didn't know. And the two ladies were wearing dresses that were almost identical. But I'm safe because I know you have to swear, right? Oh. And so I'm dancing along, and I resolve. And Randy says, they're wrong. I said, no. I said, And I said, don't stop. Keep going. And I thought I took my best shot. And so Randy took it over, and he resolved it, which is great. And then he continued to call, and he put them in a very odd, unique L-shaped formation, you know, the old 6 and 2 L shape. And then leaned over to me, and he says, it's an Alamanla. And said, take it, John. Now, he did that basically, he made me look good. He was trying to make me look good because I'd already had a little mess up and the floor saw it. And it wasn't the end of the world either way, but he didn't have to do that. What a terrific professional approach to dealing with another caller, you know. And I afterwards, I'll tell you what I said at the time, but at the time I looked at him and says, oh crap, I'm going to have to go learn crayons. And he started laughing. But afterwards, I thanked him. I said, what a professional thing to do. What a great way to interact, because he's got nothing to prove to anybody. You know, there's no way he's going to be threatened by me in any way, shape, or form. Take care of each other. Don't try to impress the floor when you're working with another caller. Work with the other caller for the sake of the dancers. The business about you get them in and I get them out, that should be a showmanship thing that's done for the sake of the dancers, not for trying to stuff the other caller. Because when you do that, the dancers end up losing, right? And any one of us can go back, and if we work at it, we can write up something that whoever we're working with is going to have a hard or impossible time to get out of. And that's not the point of the game. It's to entertain. One of the funnest things you might work up if you have a friend who's a caller, you want to do a little showmanship thing. And we did this on the fly. It was Don Nosher's idea. We were working a session. I had the hour, he had the hour before. He said, how about if I hang around and we play? And I said, well, that's great. We were in the, I believe we were in the A1 hall and up in New England and Vermont, Maple Sugar Festival. And Don says, how about this? I'll call a sequence, but I'll finish up and I'll say, okay, John, you can't use right and left through. So go ahead and call your sequence. So I'm calling my sequence. And so when I finish my sequence, okay, Don, you can't use right and left through, and you can't use past the ocean. So we kept that up, you know, and of course it got into, by the time we were at 5 calls, you know, each one of us would say, okay, so now I can't do this, this, and this, right? And you call it. And the dancers were hanging on the edge, waiting for one of us to screw it up, you know, waiting for one of us to use the call we shouldn't use. And it was fun. And he and I were having fun with it. Of course, we were sight calling and going along and resolving each time and then come back. And it got harder and harder. And so finally, my last turn, I said, okay, Don, no problem. You can only use the calls we eliminated. And everybody laughed and we went on from there. But yeah, it was great fun. Now, Don and I talked after and said, you know, we got to work that thing up, you know, on purpose so that, you know, instead of having somebody fail, you know, that we have that very thing. Okay, these are the calls you can't use. And we have already worked out a sequence, you know, that he can say, okay, I can't use this, this, and this, and then use it and resolve with it. It's a showmanship thing, pure and simple. It's all pre-done. And none of it was hard. Do yourselves a favor if you are doing calling with another caller, whether you be trading calls or whether you be trading sequences, but particularly if you're trading calls every other call, make sure you maintain the level. Very often, if you go to do that, the program drops. People just drop, boom. If you're a plus program, keep some plus calls in there, you know, and that protrudes through any of the programs because it's better for the dancers because that's the level of the program they came in to dance. And it's also makes it more exciting for everybody, and you can do it, you know, if you like that sort of game. Chris, you've been waiting a long time. You had something you wanted to share with us. Did you remember?
Yeah, it was just I wanted to just pipe up about mental image and being connected to the floor. The now there might be I think there are people use different people have some different systems that they refer to as mental image. When a bunch of us say it, we mean Don's system or some derivation of Don's system, and I think some other people might be doing something a little different, and they also call that mental image, which is fine. But I use a system that's based on Don Beck's system, and when I use it, it's the same as what Don says. I'm really watching the floor, and I feel you know, quite connected to them. If I wanted to make a joke or something about it, I could close my eyes, you know, or turn my back or do some outrageous thing like that. Just you know, in the case where the dancers knew that it was mental image for some reason, and you know, I was just being funny about it or something. But normally I'm watching them also, and I'm not, and what I'm looking for is the timing and how the floor is doing generally, and so on. I'm not really looking at you know, sometimes I'll match in my head the mental guy. Oh yeah, that's Bob down there, isn't it, at the moment? And I might watch that a little bit. But really, what I'm looking at is the overall, you know, the flow and the timing and how the floor is doing and that sort of thing. And then the actual tracking of everything is just going on upstairs.
Understand? Yeah. Mike, are you doing well down in Florida? Staying safe?
Yeah, I'm here. Everything's fine. We just started a SSD class last Tuesday. Not a real great turnout, but we're going to try it again this Tuesday. Hopefully, we'll get some more. I started out as a site caller. I've been calling about 27 years. I started out as a site caller resolver, but lately I've trying to convert myself to relationships and mental image now that recently I've seen this discussion on mental image, and I have Jay King's Fundamentals of Calling that I read thoroughly through after some of the sessions that within the last month or so. And I'm quite excited about trying to get going with that. Even at advanced, I'm trying to learn to call advanced, and I can see it applied there too. So
Sure.
I guess
Sure.
that's about it.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, Mike, there's no such thing as standard application at advanced. It's a different philosophy when you cross that barrier into advanced. And that's a good thing, because we think we used to live through the whole thing of rush to plus, from mainstream into plus, watching clubs get depleted. If we were to go to standard application at advanced, and some of it's actually starting to happen, unfortunately, watch how fast your plus club's empty. You don't want to do that. And there needs to be a barrier. There needs to be a reason for people to go to advanced. I've asked people when they come, if I don't know them and they want to come take an advanced lessons, and I say, that's great. Are you bored with plus? Have you decided you just need more than that? And some people say, well, yeah, a little. And I said, well, do you dance to more than one caller at the program? And if they say yes, that's always positive. If they say no, I said, you might want to think about that. Have you been doing any plus DVD type workshops or anything? Well, no. Do you know your definitions? What do you mean definitions? And that happens, and then there's others who say, and this is the one where I laugh right out loud. I've had people say to me, no, we just got to get away from these bad dancers. And I truly laughed right out loud. And I said, folks, trust me, they're up there waiting for you. Every program has poor dancers. Knowing more calls does not make you a better dancer, not in the least. One summer I ran a session on how to be a better dancer. We had 7 sessions. It was no higher than plus, but I had dancers from programs as high as C1, and eventually even some C2 people showed up. And I still had like 3 or 4 pages of notes that I hadn't even gotten to after 7 sessions. And some of it's as simple as asking a dancer, and sometimes callers, what's the difference between walking and dancing? When you walk, your heel touches first. When you dance, your toes touch first. But people wouldn't necessarily know that. And then you'd find that into the dancer I have a classic dancer who still dances to me. If he ever took a step in time to the music, it'd be by accident. But he knows where to be and when to be there. And there's other things that he does do. But we covered things like how to help other dancers and how not to help. We always talk about touching hands, so important. We talked about when to disengage, when it's important to break that hold. There's so many things, but when you go to advanced, multiple position or all position, take your pick, is part and parcel of it. Always has been. And I think for right now, where we are in the activity, that's important, because we don't want people bailing out of plus. We just need to call better plus. If you see the dancers starting to entertain themselves, they need more than you're giving them. Some people you got to let go. If they need to go to that, other people give them a little bit more and they'll stay. But I would hope that you can honor that, because that's classically what has been the biggest difference. It's not just a collection of other vocabulary. Positional dancing is part and parcel. I won't name the caller. He was a great caller and a friend, but he asked me, he was new advanced, and he said, could I send him tapes? And I said, I didn't have any A1 to send him, because that's never been popular in our area. We've never been able to sell it. But I sent him tape from my A2 club, and I cautioned him. I said, some of these folks have been dancing A2 to me for a long time. Some of them even dance challenge, but I don't go off the list. I don't bleed the lists, but some of it's going to be harder. So check it out before you use any of it. And he very, very kindly wrote back. He said it was great, because he said that the flow and the danceability and the movement was so good. And he said, and I never once occurred to me to call square chain through from a spirit upset. And I was smiling to myself, because that's where it gets called like 90% of the time, from head square chain through. But it never crossed his mind to do that. So again, he was researching. He was looking for info and insight to how to do things. And that's the easy way to do it, Jerry. You know, that's the easiest approach to it, most common. But that whole idea of standard application was designed as a teaching tool to help new callers know how to be more successful. New callers don't necessarily know what's hard and what isn't. They might know it from a dancer view, but they don't necessarily know it from a caller view and how you're putting things together. And this was it was a great tool, but the unintended consequences, I'm sorry to say, it's become the default level at Plus. I was in California, it's been 3 years ago now. I had 18 square floor, Plus Club, great caller. I had head square through 4, third tip. Swing through, spin chain, exchange of gears. I dumped 18 squares. Well, Mr. Clever, I'm thinking they didn't hear me, or maybe they were thinking just spin chain the gears. So I called it again, same way. Mr. Clever, right? I only lost 16 squares that time. It made for a different kind of night than I would have hoping to call. But that's the way they knew calls. They at least didn't stop me from calling spin the top without putting a swing through in front of them. There have been floors who have just stopped and said to the caller, you can't do that. You didn't call swing through first. That's not the dancer's fault.
No.
But,
John, one of the things that you were just saying about, you know, the dancers moving up maybe before they should because they're not being entertained where they are, reminds me of an article that I wrote when I was doing a monthly article for the New England Square Dance Caller magazine. I hope many of you are familiar with the Peter Principle, where people rise to the level of their incompetence. Namely, in industry, you're good at your job, so they promote you to the next level, and you're good at that job, so they promote you to the next level, and you're not good at that job, so you don't get promoted. So you get stuck at the level that you're not good at. And so everybody rises to the level of their own personal incompetence. So effectively, everybody's incompetent because they've risen to that level. And that applied to a lot of square dancers at the time, and probably still does. They're good at Plus, so they move up to advanced A1. They're good at that. They move up to A2. They're not good at that, so they don't move up to C1, but they're a bad A2 dancer instead of dancing A1 where they should be. A couple of other thoughts.
Don, let me weigh in on that part before you move on. I refer to people as the type of dancer you're talking about as equal opportunity standers. They start off at mainstream, whatever, and they're getting about 60, 65% most of the time. They move on to Plus, they're getting 60, 65%. They think they're doing fine. I mean, they go to A1, same thing. You know, they think they're doing fine because they're dancing as much as they always do at every program. They're doing as much floor time as they have used to doing. So in their mind, they're doing just fine. They even think they're doing as well as everybody else for the most part. It's not true, but that's how it feels to them. And we have to pay attention to how dancers feel about things. You know, feelings and reality don't always match up. And we do see that there are people who have a lack of self-awareness. We know that exists, and it's problematic, and how you cope with it, and how the floor copes with it. But it's interesting that we see this acting out pretty much on a regular basis. And my goal is to do as much as I can to help those people do better. Again, encouraging Plus people to do more. I try to take. When I can, I'm kind of tough. I'll tell people if I don't think they're ready. You know, if I've seen them dance, if I don't think they're ready, I'll tell them you need more Plus workshop time and try the next lessons. It's basically like they don't meet the prerequisite. You know, they didn't pass 5th grade to go on to 6th grade. You know, for want of a better way of saying it. And fortunately, you don't have to do it often, and you let people try. And there are people who will push for it, and I'll say, okay, as long as we agree that if I come to you and say, the way this is working out, it's not good for you, it's not good for the class, you have to agree that if that happens, that you'll step away. I mean, obviously it would be a private discussion and so on, but it's a terrible thing to have to do. I don't want to do it. I try not to, but sometimes we remember that other people's time and money is valuable.
The wonderful thing about our activity, though, is there are more people than you would realize that are like that, and they can have fun too. You know,
Mhm.
at their level, we're providing entertainment for them also, even if we have to work at keeping them from dragging down the fun of the rest of the group. But they're having fun too, and if we could, keep them entertained when they can't otherwise, that's
I'm going to try Dan's idea. So you guys go ahead and talk. I'm going to try moving myself 180 degrees, see if I can get tails.
We see your shirt well. Tony, you're welcome aboard. You're only an hour and a half late, but that's okay. Better late than never.
I had some errands I had to do.
And you were right.
Good to see you.
Go ahead, Tony.
No, that was it. I do have a question that came up for the Australian contingent. Well, as long as I'm here, I see Mel anyway.
I think I'm the only one left.
No, Alan.
Oh, no,
Alan's still
there.
here.
Hi, Alan.
I'm writing my book on traditional squares, and it's going to have a big glossary that's going to cover some terms from the modern contingent and also from dancing in other parts of the world. And I seem to recall that that roundup had a special meaning in Australia. I don't know if it still does. So can you fill me in on that?
I'm going to make a comment first, Alan. The roundup is one of my big banes when I got here in Australia because it's every single tip. But I'll let Alan tell about the history.
I think the term you use in the US is like a grand march. So in Australia, it's not so much these days, but we used to round up every bracket. In other words, it was a mechanism of trying to mix people, but then we found they were actually engineering the roundup all the time, so they still danced with the same people they got. But effectively, you start with one line of boys, one line of girls, and you'd say first couple left, next couple right, sort of thing, and away they'd go and they'd make a square. If you were really getting frustrated with them engineering it, you'd say, okay, the boys turn around and go the other way and pick up the back girl. And so you would then really mix your squares up. But yeah, it's sort of lost its way a little bit now in Australia. I think it's probably come from that somebody's seen the Grand March in the US and then thought that's a great idea. They thought it occurred every bracket, but no. And that's pretty much the way it was when I first started calling, that everybody rounded up. And then at national conventions, it was a way of really mixing up people from various states and everything. So you actually got a chance to have squares that weren't just your own group all the time.
Okay. And it was always in the form of a circular march. It wasn't just a line of boys on one side and a line of girls on the other side and mash them together.
Yeah, it was always at big functions. You'd say they could square up as a couple in the lines, and then you'd go first four left, next four right, sort of thing, and mix.
Okay, so it wasn't a means of picking a partner. It was a means of getting into squares with your partner, but with different other couples.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, and a bracket is the same as a tip.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
I learned that one the hard way.
Yeah, I seem to remember reading that a bracket in Australia, that it's not just used in square dancing; it's used in ballroom dancing also. If the band is playing more than one number and you're doing it with the same partner, that's a bracket.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to ask what a bracket was. I haven't heard that term before.
Yeah, bracket's a tip. Pattern singing call, or pattern two singing calls, or two pattern singing call, depending on what
I think it may
is.
actually have been in use in ballroom dancing before it was adopted by square dancers in Australia, but I'm not sure.
Could well be, because Ron Jones, who was involved in the early days of square dancing here when Joe Lewis first came out. He was a ballroom dance instructor and was impressed with square dancing. So he moved into square dancing as well as ballroom dancing.
I didn't know that.
And he was responsible for the very flamboyant exhibition squares that did all sorts of aeroplane lifts and all that sort of stuff. And I guess he may well have used the term bracket, you know, coming from the ballroom side.
Quite possible, yeah. I would ask both Mel and Alan. My opportunities in Australia were limited to the mini lab when I was chairman, and I was there for that, which was very successful. But we also had the opportunity. We were invited to call a little bit at your national, and I have remarked since, you know, the format at the national was, you know, 2 singers and then a patter, or hack, and I wondered, is that the pattern normally at clubs dances, or is that just big functions?
2 singers and when I first started calling, that was pretty much typically what a bracket was. Open with a song, do a hoedown in the middle, and finish with the song. Callers who felt they entertained better with hoedowns would do it the other way around. They might have a couple of songs and then have a patter.
But 3 parts.
Yeah, but then as dancers got older, we found that was not as effective, and so they started to drop back to a song and a patter. And that's pretty much the way it is for most clubs these days. A 2-number bracket.
So the singer comes first?
Not always. No, in Australia, I would say probably the singer would come second. And so they do their challenge and their hoedown stuff. And it really just depends on the caller, whether he felt his strengths were in his patter or his strengths were in his song.
Yeah, it sounds as though it's not as set in stone as it is in the States, where it's almost always a patter and a singer.
Yeah.
My perspective on it is a little bit different, because I've only been in Australia now for about 17 years. And, you know, so I'm still considered new to the country, or still a blow-in, as they call it. But one of the things that I noticed is, one, on the, as you say, the opener or the grand march at the beginning of each session, especially at festivals or any kind of big dance, it's become a dividing issue amongst dancers and callers. The first big festival I called, I didn't know that this was supposed to be done each time, so I got up and I called, and then, you know, put the mic down, took my 2.5 minute break, and I got up and said, okay, square them up. And then I would say, okay, everybody, if you haven't danced with somebody, grab somebody new and square them up. And it was like there was no grand march, and it was a bit confusing at first, and because it wasn't done. You know, who's this weird Canadian doing this kind of thing? And the other thing was, as you say, a bracket. You have a 2-number bracket or a 3-number bracket. In other words, a patter singing call or a patter singing call, or basically 3 records. And that also became a divisive tip, where the focus, in my opinion, especially listening to the callers, seemed to change from the focus on the dancers to the focus on not irritating the callers' egos. And it became a very, very strong dividing tool of everybody wants to be, they want 3-number brackets. That way everybody gets a chance to call at the festival, or they get a chance. And the focus on the dancers was lost there for a long, long time. And it's still a big point of argument. I remember one festival, Alan, you were the program director, I think, that was in Canberra, where it was a few callers didn't show up. That was actually my first festival. A few callers didn't show up. And I was watching the stress you were going through, because, oh, look at all these slots available. Everybody was there. And Alan very graciously, and for me, that was my introduction into the area, said, well, I know Mel can call. I know he's done this. Here's a new caller. We're going to give him those brackets, and just stopped all the arguments. But it actually got fairly vocal and fairly angered between some of the callers because of the egos. They weren't focused on the dancers. And a marvelous job, Alan.
Alan,
Talking about bringing it back to the topic of the day, Mel and I our first meeting was that he came to Canberra to one of my dances, and so we get up together, and I blow the figure, the second figure or something, and he goes into we're in the song, and he goes into the middle break, but I wasn't concentrating enough, and he corrected it, and so I thought I don't want to leave him with the mess. I'll fix it. So I fixed it in the third time through the music. And in the meantime, he thinks I'm trying to have a go at him because I hadn't realised he fixed it. I've refixed it, and so now we're in a real competition.
Yeah, and what was interesting about it is the dancers were trying to figure out what are we doing. We're playing up there, and they were just giggling crazy. It's like, wait a minute, Alan's put him here, Mel's put him back. Well, they're trying to confuse. They thought, and we just weren't watching each other, and that's how it all started. But
if it ain't broke, fix it until it is.
Yeah.
Alan, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been calling?
43 years. So I probably started about the same time as John. Did you say you'd been calling?
Started in 69.
Yeah, well, I started in 68, so that's very close.
Mm-hmm.
But we were sort of backwards to some extent because the activity was more in the forefront in the US.
Yeah,
and so it took us quite a while to sort of catch up, I think. But it really wasn't until Keith Lethbridge from Western Australia went to the US and came back with the idea of sight calling that we even got to really hear about sight calling, and because we probably weren't going to seminars and things, we weren't catching up on how fast the activity was moving and how it was developing. Yeah, so it was quite interesting.
Yeah, there were some big changes over the time. There's no question about that. Some amazing changes, and the idea that crossed my mind now is I saw something, then I learned something from a caller named Tom Roper at a national. They were in what was supposed to be a harder plus hall. It was supposed to be, they had a couple of hours scheduled in, not all the time, but for positional plus, if you will. And the callers were generally scheduled for 15 minutes, and to divide however they chose. And one caller had been in there calling. I don't know who he was. He had a difficult time. The dancers really couldn't do much of what he was trying to call, partly because some of it didn't work, and partly because some of it was highly questionable as appropriateness for the group. And he did the whole 15 minutes that way. He didn't break it into two parts. And so the floor was somewhat disgruntled and unhappy, and dancers were questioning, should they stay in the room? And Tom Roper came in behind this fellow, and first thing he did was put on a singing call. And he did a nice singing call that everybody could do. So he was reestablished their self-confidence. He he still had his pattern to follow, and he got very nice, interesting stuff. The floor was all able to do it because, for one thing, he rebuilt their self-confidence, and at the same time, he built trust between himself and these dancers, so they didn't leave. And it was a very clever thing to do, a very clever way to approach it, instead of just coming in and saying, as we always do, I'm going to call my pattern, then I'm going to call my singer. He chose to reverse that. And it also let him get a better feel for those dancers at the same time, because he couldn't certainly judge them based on what happened the tip before. Smart guy. And I've always tried to remember that, this might be a tool to be used somewhere in the future, because nobody's going to shoot him down for doing the singer first. It was his choice. It was his 15 minutes. And now you always have that situation of people say, well, I don't really like to do singing calls, but that room was not advertised as no singers. It was okay. Some callers were doing both, and a number of callers were doing both, but he chose to change the typical order, but it was a smart way to do it. Always kind of watching out for the dancers. And
One of the
they loved it.
one of
Taking
the things that Jim Mayo taught me many decades ago in programming, the first tip, especially if it's not your own group, if you're going someplace else, a convention or guest calling, the first tip, the purpose of the first tip is to prove to the dancers that they can dance to you, to give them the confidence that, you know, no matter what they've heard about you or by reputation being too hard, too easy, or what have you, prove to them that they can dance to you, build their confidence, just like you said your friend did there.
And you should be confident about what you present. You should make the dancers feel like, you know, I can do whatever he's going to call. I mean, certainly he wouldn't call anything he didn't expect us to be able to do. And that you plant that seed with the dancers, and they will often exceed themselves. Because if John's calling it, you know, they've already danced to me. They've got the sense of body flow and timing and resolve, and they're feeling good about what they're doing. So if I call something else, well, we ought to be able to do it, or John wouldn't have called it. And it might be a bit of a stretch, but chances are they'll do a better job of it if I've already built that confidence, that trust level. They'll do things for you that they might not do for somebody else.
Just
John,
a quick aside, to personal note to John, we were talking before about these sessions on the phone, and I told you that don't worry, a discussion will happen no matter whether people have something to say or not. We always break into discussions, and they're always,
of course, it's great. Alan,
always,
what were you going to say?
I was going to say, bringing you back to the comment you made about emceeing, we had Joe Lewis out because he was sort of regarded as being the father of when square dancing really got off in a big way in Australia in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had him back for our national convention as a guest. And we had 2 halls operating in 2 sports pavilions. And so as a guest, I took him down to where he was programmed in the 2nd hall, which happens to be a gymnasium type hall. And so he got up to call, and I realized straight away while he was calling that he was struggling. And I was trying to figure out why. And then I suddenly realized he didn't have enough music up on stage. And so I reluctantly stepped up on stage and adjusted the sound system for him. Well, he was so, you know, amazed. He said, "Oh, they're giving me some music, fantastic." And away he went, sort of thing. And he was back into his real entertaining way. And it sort of taught me that sometimes you need to step up there, and even though you think, "Oh, I don't really want to be interfering with another caller's sound," there were circumstances where I had to do it, and it worked out really well. He was just so appreciative that
I'm sure, yeah.
that I'd stepped up and immediately gave him what he needed to get underway.
Yeah, it's a hard feeling. The one time that I called at the National there, and it was actually Tim Mariner and myself and Paul, I think, Australian.
I suddenly realized that we've met because I was at Newbie Callers.
I recognized you when you came on the screen, and I couldn't have placed, you know, if you said, "What's that man's name?" I'm so bad with names because I've been predetermined my whole life to read badges. And so I was not as good about that, but I did recognize you, truly. But when we got up to call, if you remember, Lion King was the theme that year. And they had the sound hut on the stage, which was very interesting and nice. They could see us, but they had 5 full yak stacks about 20 feet above us on a fan, in a fan shape, and going along. And we started the call, and they also had 4 speakers on the stage for the callers.
Ah, yes.
And we started calling, and I'm looking at Tim, and Tim is looking at me, and we're both trying to figure out what's going on. There was a lag time between the acts that the people were hearing throughout this double gymnasium and the speakers that we had down in front of us. And so we were trying to figure out what are we going to call to? And we did get it together, and we were okay. We did 2 singers, and we did get it together for that, and finally, but it was a strange sensation. We weren't expecting it, and I didn't really know what to signal to the guys in the booth because we hadn't really talked about any of that. And so it was the session went very well. It was very exciting and fun, and not to put too fine a point on it, the dancers were very, very kind and didn't want us to get off the stage. But there's a program that's got to be followed here, and so I eased my way over to the window for the sound guys, and I said, "Whatever happens next, you should have announcements. Have somebody make announcements about anything. Doesn't matter what it is." And then went back and said, folks, you got, thank you so much. You're very kind. You got a good program set, and other callers that'll be following along. And thanks again. And we made our exit. And then they had somebody come out to do announcements because it was not a really nice position to put somebody else in behind that. And I'm not trying to be egotistical about it, but there was a definite difference in floor response when we came off the stage. And so I didn't want to put another caller in that kind of a position. Do you all remember progressive squares and how that works? The master of that was, in all likelihood, Jerry Helt. And Jerry, I think, invented it, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think he did. And he did it, he introduced it at a national. And he has this whole routine that he does with it. He takes the dancers out a little bit and then brings them back to their original square. And then he takes them a little further out, and then he brings them back to their original square. And it's working really well. And then for the very last one, he doesn't bring them all the way back. And it's kind of like, well, you understand. Now, people have never seen this before. So they're already over the moon, over this. This is amazing. This is very cool. And then he put on the singing call. And he took them out and brought them back, and took them out and brought them back, et cetera, et cetera. And the last figure, he actually did it in the closer. He actually brought them all the way back to their original home, leaving them to believe he had made a mistake before. You understand, guys, y'all know how it works now, so they could forgive him his mistake in the patter, and he brings them all the way back in the closer of the singing call, and I think the tag was something like, "Gee, it's good to be home again," in the singing call. And the room went crazy. I mean, these people were darn near pulling their clothes off. They just went out of their minds over this. What a showmanship thing, right? And then, of course, there was a caller who had to come behind that. How would you like to have been that caller? That would not be a fun position to be in. I happen to know who that caller was, and I won't tell you, but I was kind of glad about it myself. But,
John, the first time I heard Jerry do that was at we have an annual thing in New England where all the different callers associations get together and they bring in a presenter. And they brought Jerry in, and he did some talking of this, and people were recording it. And he was about to do his progressive squares thing, and he asked people to turn their tape recorders off. Little did we know why. And when he finished the patter, like you were just saying, everybody had this quiet embarrassment for him. They didn't want to say anything, but, oh God, he screwed up. But, we'll let, should we tell him? No, we won't say anything. And then, of course, when he did the full resolve at the end of the singing call, it was
that's great.
Amazing reaction.
What a showman. Yeah.
He was a showman and a gentleman, a real good
Yes. For those of you who find yourself in a position of teaching on things like this, I had a very specific point. I know. If you've been invited to make a presentation, don't be hesitant to make sure the room is set up the way you would like it. It can make a difference. And you reminded me of this, Tom, when I was invited to do that very thing you're talking about. Clark, I believe you were there. You might remember. I know Jim Mayo was there. And I came in to do my panel presentation for you guys. And the room was set up, and there were like benches along one side and benches along the other. So everybody took their spots in these benches, and I'm spending the entire session doing this to this. I was like a tennis match, trying to incorporate everybody to see if looking at faces, seeing people were following what I was saying. There were questions, and never. And I swore never again. I'll never let that happen again. I want them in front of me, semicircle, whatever, preferably, but never going to let that happen again. I don't care if it took 15 minutes out of my time for them to get chairs, but I ain't never doing that again. It just changed the whole feel of the presentation. You just can't draw people in. You want to do that. You want to bring them in. And it's just like when you're teaching, you want every dancer in the room to feel like you're talking to them as an individual. And there's ways to do that, but we don't have that session time.
Right. I'll amplify on that just in general. When you get to a hall, like, I want to make sure the room's a temperature that I like. I might open up windows. There might be some trash. I might need to sweep the floor because the custodian didn't do it. Whatever it takes to make, and where I set my table up, if it's a hall that I don't normally call in, trying to figure out how I want to do the sound, where are people coming in, where are they taking money, etc. You basically want, if no one else is, you're in charge of making the dancers going to be comfortable with the room situation, even if it's not just how you're calling and so forth. So pay attention to that. And also,
So Clark,
hey, Michael got out of his car in his home.
Clark.
Yep.
So owning the room, just like owning the hall when you're calling in it that I talked about earlier, a room you're not used to, go in, try to own the hall. It applies in both circumstances. It really makes a difference. Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
I remember showing up early for one dance. I ended up having to strip and re-wax the floor with the janitor. It was a school hall. The crew didn't show up. I showed up early to try and find the hall because it's usually my want, and we ended up stripping the entire floor completely and re-waxing it for the dance that night.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know we've heard from Alan, Josephson, or Hannah and Lars. You guys haven't piped in at all. Is there anything you want to share with us? Hey, Michael. And Cee Cee, he's hiding, kind of quiet.
Well, I've just been listening. I've been enjoying all the historical notes, and John, from your presentation, there were a couple of nuggets that I really took away. The idea about changing when you get stuck, change the formation. That's very helpful, and I'm gonna, because I have gotten in spots like that. I'm pretty new caller. I'm going to go into a caller school next spring, so I'm gonna work on some things. But I'll take some of your golden nuggets to heart.
Great. The thing is, all the people that you see in this panel, whether they've been doing this for 50 years or have been 20 years, you notice though, they're all still learning, all still sharing. Anytime you teach anything, you're going to learn something. And anytime you share, the best callers are the ones who continue to learn, in my opinion. They're the ones who stay fresh. They keep their material fresh. They don't fall into the trap of calling the same dance for 30 years, type thing. And losing people over time when they don't need to. It's great to see people do that who lots of time in, committed, but they're all still understanding that they can still improve, make changes and differences in their program. Even if it's sometimes I've been at these things and it's like somebody brings up an idea and I say, man, I used to call that all the time. Why did I stop using that? That was good. I got to bring that back into my program. We can't necessarily remember every bit of it. So it's anything I say from new callers, they'll have questions or ideas, or they'll bring up things that trigger things in us too that we can learn from. And of course, there's always the popular learning what not to do, like being under the wrong light.
And also, I want to mention, I really appreciate your anecdote about Ann and Sandy and Glenn. I have newfound respect for him for stepping up like that. I've always respected him as a caller, but that was
it was good.
You mentioned, if I'll just interject, just coming back on it, you mentioned something about that threshold or that barrier pushing through the programs or pushing through the levels. One of the things that I noticed, I started calling in Europe, so I had that advantage, and one of the callers I learned from was actually a German caller. He was my mentor, and then a couple of Americans that were calling down in the area. And I noted a big difference when I came back, because where I see it in Japan, in the Czech Republic, or that area of that time, was they were calling to the dancers based on the translations of the definitions. And the one thing that I noted in all the books that I got that were translated is they didn't translate all the material that was coming out with the books. They translated the definitions, they translated a few of the core exercises, but you were expected to know and learn how to apply this. All the choreography wasn't written out for you. Mm-hmm. So you were expected to learn that. And when I got back to Canada and then started traveling around and calling, I noticed that a lot of the material was written. So you had your singing call, it was written, your choreography was written, it was downloaded off the site, and it was copied. And it just really struck me that that's where you said it's not the dancers that were getting bored that was causing this rush to plus, it was the callers getting bored that dropped that level. Because I think that barrier used to be there between basic and mainstream and plus and advanced. And I think
that's fascinating flip of how I intended it. You did a 180 on me there, because when Jim says there's no such thing as bored dancers, only bored callers, he meant because the callers keep calling too hard, keep always offering something new all the time, or something that's too hard, is what Jim's point was.
Okay.
And you did a 180 on me there. I didn't think of that.
It differently then.
Yeah.
Jim always used to say, dancers like to be challenged, but win.
Yeah.
And he and I talked about it, and I said they really don't want to be challenged. They want to think they are, but they want variety. Mm-hmm. And no matter how good a caller you are and how well you can handle what you're doing, listening to John and some of the other conversations here may give you a parallel thing that you're good at, but allow you and the dancers to get some variety out of it by just thinking about, I've done it this way successfully, but what if I do it this way? Maybe it'll just feel a little different to me, and therefore a little different to the dancers, and keep them entertained.
It's never a challenge between the caller and the dancers. The callers hold all the aces. There's no question. The trick isn't to break square, and the trick is how to keep the squares going. You might take them to the edge, but don't let them fall off the edge. And you can't do that all the time either. They'll make them a nervous wreck. But sometimes you use it, and it's very effective, and they get excited. But there's no trick to breaking a square. It's the easiest thing in the world. Just start with bad body flow, and you're done.
Or call heads fan the top. Jim, sorry, Clark, but Jim.
Hey.
Again, I quote Jim frequently because he was my first real teacher and mentor, and I tried to get him to do a talk for us on judgment, which is one of the things I remember most from him. But he's happy sitting back watching things these days. But, oh God, I was just going to quote him on something you said.
Bored dancers, not bored callers.
No, not that. Not the dancers like to be challenged, but win. Oh, one of his comments is that anybody can break down a square. It takes a caller to keep them dancing.
Mm-hmm.
A good caller.
So while we're on
Thank
the
you,
topic
Mickey.
of Jim Mayo,
we should do a session on Jim Mayo stories.
We could do Jim Mayo stories. First, everyone has sayings and says how often they keep dancers moving and what their goal is and so forth. But we know from maybe Paul Cote's talk that talk's cheap. But if you really want to know how you're doing, you should have some video of your dance and have someone say, hey, I videotaped your 8-square dance. And you say you like to keep most of the people dancing most of the time, but I just did a tally and you had 2 squares broken down 80% of the time or something. And I know Jim believed in keeping people dancing, and I think generally he did. However, last week's talk with Tony showed a segment of 2 squares with Jim calling to them. I didn't know if anyone noticed. It was pretty, routine choreography and good timing and delivery like you'd expect. And yet the back square broke down.
Didn't notice that.
Just saying.
Yeah, but the bottom line is that doesn't necessarily mean that the blame lays with the caller.
Oh, right. It could be the dancers. I agree.
Or the acoustics.
Or the acoustics, or who
Well,
knows what.
now, wait a minute, guys. We all know that's the deal, and then they complain about the sound. And you want me to raise the sound or lower the level? Which
One of
You
the
have to
best,
turn up the dancer excitement knob.
yeah.
the best advice I was ever given on sound was if the dancers say they can't hear you, turn it down. Because that's usually the problem, is it's too loud.
Too much sound, yeah.
Yeah. I my anecdote on sound was at the Canberra convention. There was, when you were talking about this fanned array of speakers, the main hall was set, instead of lengthwise down the hall, was widthwise down the hall, and there was this big fanned array of speakers on it. And Alan was doing the sound and that and about 5 other halls and 50 other different things. And he had a very creative solution to fixing the sound in the main hall, and that was unplug half the speakers.
Sometimes. Yeah, very often it's too much sound.
Yeah,
I mentioned that, I think, a few weeks ago in my column speaker talk. When you've got 2 speakers up there and somebody says, can you adjust one of them? You go up and unplug it, and that's the best adjustment you can do.
Well, I know Mickey, the people, they say they can't hear, and Mickey's, I'll take care of that. And he turns to his turntable and his amplifier, and he goes, that'll do it. Hasn't touched a thing. But they dance so much better the next time. We see that happen. Here's my best sound story, and then I'm going to ask for a departure time. I've got some family waiting for some things, but it was my very first larger festival. It was a large festival in Richmond, Virginia, and I was the new kid on the block, and Gary Shoemake was on the staff, and another caller whose name eludes me, I apologize, from Florida, and one other, another positive local caller. And I went into the big room, as it were, on Friday night at 10 o'clock. And the chairman came over to me and said, Mr. Murrah, I'm sorry, John, if you don't mind, we're going to have to take a little bit of your time. We've been having a real sound problem in the hall, and they've got it figured out, and they're going to fix it. And I said, well, fine, that'll be better for me, I'm sure. And I mean, I'm not getting involved. I'm the new guy. I'm going to go along with whatever the flow is, and mind my P's and Q's and hope to get asked back. And but I look over, and this room would have held 40 squares at most. They had 5 full yak stacks on stands going across the stage. And at that time, I wouldn't have known enough to say too much sound. I just wasn't that well informed yet. But I watched, and they told me that the local callers association guys had figured it out, and we're going to fix it. And I watched them take the far speaker all the way down, and they rotated it 180 degrees, and they put it back on the stand, and they put it back up. And I said, I'm sorry, what are they doing? And he said, well, they said the speakers, these were yak stacks, they said the speakers were upside down when they mounted them, so all the sound was going into the ceiling. And they changed all 5. By the way, the sound wasn't any better. I couldn't believe it. I didn't say a word. I just didn't want to get into it or offend anybody in their local callers association who told them this was the problem. I couldn't believe it. And I saw Gary Shoemake the next morning. He was leaving. He'd just done the callers clinic, and I was coming in. We're getting ready to start the morning dancing. And I stopped there. I said, Gary, I just want to let you know they fixed the sound in the hall last night during my session at 10 o'clock. He said, really? What did they do? And I told him he had a 1-word response, which in lieu of company, I will let you imagine what that 1 word might have been. And this kept right on walking. I mean, it was just insane. And I mean, I've been in bad sound situations. I've worked with them. We all have. We deal with it as best we can, but I've never seen anything like that ever. Just turn them around. and they'll all be fine.
At least they didn't turn them sideways.
Might have been better. A little less sound. They had too much sound in the room. So often that's the case, and we don't know it. Sometimes I think more sound sources with less volume can help if it's a big room spread out.
John, did you ever get to dance in Jack Lassery's hall down in Miami or near Miami?
And not in his hall, no.
Oh, his hall. When Caller Lab was in Miami, a bunch of us the night before went to one of his dances in his hall, and he had a small speaker, a pattern of them on the ceiling, just spaced 12 feet apart. And every square had their own speaker, and every square would just line up under that speaker naturally because that's where the sound was best.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way he kept the squares lined up, and each square had good sound because they had their own personal speaker above them. It was an interesting
approach. The poor guy waxing the floor because you got all those big circles around the floor.
That's a good point. Right, the first traveling caller I ever danced to, and right out of beginner's class, was Jack Lassery. We heard all about him, and so on. And so we, myself and another couple, my girlfriend and I, and this other couple, we had taken the lessons because her parents were charter members of the Square Dance Club, and it was just easier to go take the lessons than it was to fight with them about it. That's how I got into square dancing. But we were young, we were the hot shots in the class, so we went together. And of course, not knowing any better, hadn't been told different. So we squared up in the back. Always a mistake, of course, for new dancers. But the caller can't help you. And we started off okay. And then he taught some darn thing that we never could get the whole night long. Something called Susy Q. And if you don't know it, you can look it up and see about it. It's an old one. We never could get through it. I've never forgotten that, and Jack was such a special guy, and he was so good. It was not him; it was purely us. But and we knew it was us. But it's one of those memories that sits with you, type thing, and it's not a bad memory. That's the point. We laugh about it for a long time. So it's.
John, you said that you've got to go, and I think I really do too, but I just can't resist saying the first time I met Jack Lassery, when somebody introduced me to him, and I was it was 1973, 74. I was a relatively new caller, but starting to do things, and he got all upset. He said, we've been working for a year or two about trying to get people to do hinge and trade. Now you come up with Ferris wheel and it's knocked the whole thing out.
You might want to take a moment and, as I leave, and share with any of the newer callers who don't really know who Jack was. You don't hear his name very much in Jay King's legacy, of course, with his written books and all that people have heard of in that same era. But you might want to share that, or Clark, or any of you that knew Jack, and the impact that he had on the activity. But I do have to say goodbye. Thanks again to everybody who participated. I hope I'll see some of you next week. And be well. Call good.
Goodbye, John. We'll see you next week.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
Maybe someday we'll have a session on the legends. We have.
Yeah.
I think it's time for me to go also. Guys, thanks for hanging in there. I hope you enjoyed John, and he's willing to talk to us again next week. So I'm going to bow out for this time too. Great seeing you all again. Take care. Bye.
Take care, Don.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I will shut this down.
Bye-bye.
See y'all later, everybody.
See you later.